Hi, team. If you are online, it turns out there has been a technical difficulty that's going to take about 5 minutes to remedy. So, if you'd like to do calisthenics or start a Pinterest board, uh, uh,
Can our colleagues hear us?
I think our colleagues can hear us. We need to. It's the YouTube link. So yeah, 5 minutes and back. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry. We visit you from the future to say that five minutes has elapsed. So we are back. We are quorate, and we are hanging on Tom and Crin's every word. Thank you. Please never use the word interrupt again, because apparently I will take it.
Become disrupt, right? Okay, again, we'll give you an overview of what's in the proposed draft EOA, and then we'll get into some of these individual issues. And please, give us questions as we go along. So just as a reminder, the EOA is sort of two parts: an employment forecast and a buildable land inventory. I think, again, as some questions had popped up, we are in a slow recovery from the pandemic recession. But we are, over the next 20 years, planning for growth, employment growth. That growth rate is much slower than previous business cycles. But what you see here is that in blue is the proposed growth trend. And this again is based on the Oregon Employment Department's forecast for the Tri-County region, and Portland's share of that employment is what has gone into this forecast. With that forecast, we go through a bunch of different calculations and analysis to determine what that land demand might be. And then we match that to our estimate of the supply or development capacity based on the buildable land inventory assumptions. What you see here are the five major geographies that represent different types of employment land: the central city, the neighborhood commercial area, our industrial areas, our campuses, and then the scattered employment that takes place in our residential areas. As you see here, there's lots of capacity in the central city and the neighborhood commercial districts and at our campus institutions. And it is the industrial areas where we have a tight and tightening land supply, which is where a lot of our policy decisions are really focused as part of the EOA. Zooming into the industrial sector, and again, looking at the forecast and what some of the trends are. In this top line, you see what I was just talking about, the previous business cycle, think 2008 to 2019. We grew at about 1.5% for total employment citywide. From 2019 to 2045, we're only forecasting about 0.7%. So about half. That represents the slowing down of the overall economy. It really matches or mirrors the slowing down of the population growth that's expected. This is not only occurring in Portland or the Portland region. We see the same slowing trend for the state of Oregon as a whole and for the nation as a whole. Then just the rest of this table, we're zooming in to the industrial sectors. And again, what we see here is that from 2008 to 2019, the industrial sectors were slower growing. And now the OED forecast has these industrial sectors growing slightly faster than the citywide growth rate. And then and then you see the breakdown of the four major industrial sectors: manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, wholesale trade, and construction. And these uses sort of make up the bulk of the industrial employment that we see in our industrial areas. And then at the right, you see the job growth expected by these. We will note that the manufacturing and transportation warehousing have been equalized. We've seen a lot of robust growth in the previous period, as shown here on the left. Transportation and warehousing grew at a 1.4% rate. We've sort of backed off. OED, or Oregon Employment Department, is forecasting that sort of continued high level of growth. We've backed off on that and shifted some of that employment growth to manufacturing, really to reflect some of the policy priorities that we see in our economic development strategies, especially the Advanced Portland strategy that Prosper Portland put together a few years ago. It coincides with our target industries, outdoor and apparel and food manufacturing. So, just wanted to note that sort of equalization there and emphasis on the manufacturing sector. Yeah, Eli.
Can you think of why OED is projecting acceleration of industrial growth at the same time they're projecting halving of overall economic growth for the city?
I'm not quite sure. I think they sort of look nationwide and look at the sectors that Oregon is strong in, and then what the region is strong in, but also looking at some of the what's going on in the other sectors, like the office sectors. And I think we've seen, even prior to all of the AI influences, we're seeing a slowing of the office growth rate. So I don't know all of the details on why that would be, but I just think they're taking a wider look and then bringing it down to the region, and then we're picking that up and looking at sort of our regional shares or our regional strengths and picking up on those sectors where maybe we outperform the rest of the region on, to focus on that.
Commissioner Thomas.
Tom, just on that same point, you brought up AI in the context of office space demand, but I was wondering about projected impacts of automation on industrial trends. And that was something that I was sort of looking for in the memo, or I don't even think it really came up in testimony that much, and I was sort of surprised. So maybe I'm just missing something, but that sort of seems like a big deal, and I just wasn't sure how that's being addressed here.
I think, again, at a larger scale, we're sort of deferring to OED's expertise in all of that. I think subsequent to that, what we've seen in other research and what we've heard from businesses in particular is that the automation can sort of work both ways. It can, in some ways, reduce employment, but and in other ways, it can increase productivity. And so you can produce more things faster with the same level of employment, or you can grow your business more than previous to the automation. I think it's still early to know how big a factor that's going to be and how that influences sort of employment opportunities and employment density. We have not seen, and we have later on, as in one of the segments, we haven't really seen that impact employment densities yet. We know it's going on, but we haven't seen it really shift. We've seen some shifts between sectors. For example, manufacturing employment is becoming less dense as it automates, and we've seen warehouse employment increase, primarily because of the fulfillment centers, the number of drivers and pickers and that are sort of that new e-commerce segment of the traditional warehousing and transportation sector. So the trends are sort of working in both directions, and they're kind of meeting in the middle. Again, I also think this is one of the reasons why we want to sort of continue to monitor the situation and why we want to update the EOA. Our policy calls for it to be updated every 5 to 7 years. We're now looking at, this is year 10 since we last did it. So, that's another reason to just track those trends and reevaluate every periodically. Okay, so again, the EOA encompasses a number of different decision packages, if you will, and what we're starting with is the core EOA is adopting a new employment forecast and a new buildable land inventory. We're repealing the old one, and then we're in a parallel decision process adopting the environmental overlays for the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands Project. That's the core of this decision. We know we have behind that a number of different policy projects that are in the works, in the pipeline. They have to do with the north reach of the Willamette River and setbacks and environmental overlay zones there. We have an emerging issue around the industrial residential edge and community livability buffers. We have a long-standing issue about addressing the tree code and how it applies in the heavy industrial zone. And we know we want to continue to make investments in these industrial areas, for example, brownfields or freight infrastructure, to continue to better utilize the industrial capacity that we have. So in some ways, we're trying to roll together all of those future decisions and account for them in this EOA, so that when we go to actually make those decisions, we don't have to go back and update the EOA again.
I may have missed this, but I thought that the industrial residential buffer was part of the CCIL. Is it not?
No, it's separate.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Commissioner Knowles?
So this raises a fundamental question for me. Why are we advancing the CCIL before we complete a determination of how much land we need?
We're doing it at the same time. And so if you think about this table here that we showed last time, but again, if you think about this as a series or a sequence of decisions making, and so what you have in that top line, what I call the base, is that reconciliation of here's how much supply we think we have, and here's how much demand, and what that surplus is. And then if we're ready to adopt the CCIL project, that's going to reduce that supply a little bit. It'll have a net impact there. And then, future decisions bring in the investment package. That'll raise that up. And then when we get to the North Reach or the community livability project, that'll bring that back down. But what we're showing here is that even after we go through all of those steps, we start off with a little bit of surplus, and we're going to end with a little bit of surplus.
But I don't understand how you can know the impact of the CCIL, because there's a variety of outcomes that are very property specific.
Right. So in the proposed draft, we have the proposed draft of the EOA includes the assumptions in the proposed draft of the CCIL. To the extent in the next conversation, if there are changes, significant changes to those assumptions, then we'll want to essentially update both documents so they reflect each other. And if you indicate us, we want to see this scenario or this change or whatever, we'll bring back on the April 14th meeting a new analysis, a new accounting of what those changes might, if you make these changes, it's going to, we'll update this table to show how that change could be reflected. I think that's where the conversation that you'll have, especially around the CCIL, will affect that sort of impact on the overall supply, depending on the changes that get made through that process.
So let's say we go through all the amendment process for the CCIL and all the individual properties. And you've already concluded your analysis about how much land supply there is, but the result of those amendments drastically reduces the land supply. Are you saying that in our concurrent motions, we'll go back and adjust the EOA?
Yes. Yeah. And that's where if you ask us to look at certain aspects of the CCIL tonight or in the intervening next couple of weeks, we'll bring back the updated analysis so that you can make an informed decision about which direction you want to go on the CCIL and how that would be subsequently reflected in the EOA. And that's how we're making that coordinated decision
Commissioner
to
Knowles.
understand those trade-offs.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to jump in very quickly to say, when we hear the CCIL, one of the things that won't be a part of this work session, but at the next work session, staff has been meeting with individuals who've had, concerns or had questions about the environmental zones on their properties. And so that information will be brought, in addition to anything that might come out of the discussion today, to Tom's point. Staff will also be bringing information about what the site visits have yielded in terms of decisions on individual sites. And as Tom has noted, we will calculate that so that when these two projects leave Planning Commission, when they ultimately do, they will be calibrated with each other. And we will know what the impact of whatever the CCIL recommendation ends up being on the acreage estimated in the economic opportunities analysis. That is what we are endeavoring to do with these two projects. And I'll just say, for broader context, the CCIL, there are constituencies out there that have been waiting for a long time for the environmental zones to be updated in that area. And we've always, indicated the need to coordinate that with the EOA for this very reason. And so the longer we delay, the longer those resources are not protected. And part of bringing these projects together there's been a long-standing intention to try to, evaluate the EOA, what the impacts are on the EOA, but be able to make these decisions concurrently because there have been such long delays in the updating of the environmental zones for the Columbia Corridor. So just really want to impress the importance of that because, however long those resources go unprotected, there could be a loss of those resources.
Okay. But the other way, or another way to look at this is that when the industrial land is constrained, when it's gone, there's not any more of it. So, yeah, and I don't understand how you go back and redo the EOA based on the assumptions that you've used after you constrain it further, perhaps, with the CCIL and the other environmental projects.
Sure. I think that what we're trying to demonstrate here overall is that based on our estimates of what the environmental zones do to constrain industrial land, that is what this table is showing, right? So that second row in this table is showing that if you account for the methodologies that were used to estimate the available acreage in the EOA, and then you reduce the amount that CCIL, that the environmental zones might have on that total, that's where that math is, that we're still left with the 132 acres. And then you factor in what acreage we might be able to remove constraints from. That's why the investment scenario is that's why the investment element of this is so important, because it actually adds acreage back to the accounting. So it's a ledger, right? And it's like some things will reduce acreage and other things will add acreage. At the end of the day, we're trying to demonstrate that on balance, there is available acreage needed to accommodate the industrial demand, such that we can accommodate these different policy decisions that we're either trying to make concurrently in the case of the environmental zones, or that we are anticipate in the future. So understanding, your point that you're making, I think it would be helpful to see how the conversation unfolds with the CCIL, because I think that you'll find that the changes that are going to be coming out of some of the investigation that the team has been doing are, I don't think at the end of the day, so substantial that it's going to very dramatically change things. I mean, the commission could have other suggestions, but when the staff brings back to you the information that the analysis that they've been doing on the site, the different site that they have been asked to investigate, does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
And we can have disagreement. I love it. Vice Chair Spivak.
Thank you. Well, I'll just speak to as one of the people who's been asking for the EOA to come for 6 years, and staff's been tired of us nudging. Partly is because without the EOA, it's not possible to do these environmental regulations. And so I'm glad to see them combined. And I think that for the CCIL, the fact that they're happening concurrently means that the CCIL assumptions in terms of land we can't develop is baked into the EOA model. It's like we're already saying that land's not available for industrial development. What I worry about more is the project coming up next. It's like, will there be enough? So if we're going to go forward and do a project which impacts tree canopy or wetland buffer between industrial residential lands, those projects, is there going to be enough industrial land left? I don't know. It's a little bit of a we'll wait and see. Feels a little tenuous. So I think that the CCIL part is actually pretty baked. That part, that's whatever we any land that we make unavailable for development through the CCIL will be baked into the EOA as a land constraint. The same can't be said for future projects. We have to do that analysis on those projects when we get to them.
Anything else along this? It's a worthy conversation. I think that there's been a number of questions also around how North Reach and Tree Code interact, and, you know, kind of which is the parent and which is the child. And we've decided that we don't have favorites for the purpose of the of scheduling this, but we can all disagree. Please.
Okay, we'll get into some of the more details on some of the demand and supply assumptions. We'll look at warehouse job density and in response to some of the testimony on the land supply side, the small sites and steep slope issues that came up, and then also on the demand side, the marine industrial land assumptions that we have put into the proposed draft and address some of those issues. In terms of warehouse job density, you know, we've gone through a sequence or a process where even back to the discussion draft, we had an assumption of 654 square feet of building space per employee. And at the discussion draft phase where we were out for public comment, we got a lot of comments back that, wow, that looks really low. So we went back and we checked our work and we expanded our view and we made some adjustments and we came back, and the proposed draft is based on 972 square feet per employee for the warehouse. You see in those other two columns the assumptions that we have for just general industrial sort of manufacturing space as well as some flex space. Again, what you heard in testimony to you all is like, wow, the 972 still seems low to some people, and with the suggestion that it should be higher or it should match the previous EOA. What we incorporate here, again, for some reference for you is some other resources. So in the 2016 EOA, we used 1,263 feet per job. The U.S. Energy Information Administration for, I believe this is energy consumption modeling, uses 1,750 to 2,000 square feet per employee. The DLCD guidebook has 600 to 1,000. The Metro, you know, back in 2009 used 1,850. Their current, most recent urban growth report used 1,400. But again, as part of this, we went back and looked at our data and looked at what it was telling us. And we looked at what the trend is over the time. And this sort of gets back to the automation question, is we've actually seen, particularly to warehouse, that in Portland itself, that the square foot per employee over the last 25 years has been declining. And what we're doing is we're actually looking at buildings that get built, and then we're matching that to employment data to see the number of jobs that are in that building space. And so what we have here is sort of an adjustment, a factor that, you know, even though the last 4 or 5 years we're close to 800 square feet per employee, we're giving it a little bit of a conservative hedge and moving that up to 972. And so we as staff still sort of stand by that number as a solid assumption that's supported by our development trend evidence and analysis.
So the reference to the Metro projections reminds me of a question. How have you reconciled your estimates with the region's I don't know what they call it, economic opportunity analysis, or the region's projections about the need for industrial land? Because what you showed in the table was a job density of 1,400.
Yes. I think that, so again, when we trace back the metro, it is a little bit difficult to trace back the metro numbers and to really understand what changes, what evidence they were looking at to change their assumptions. And that's why, you know, we are sort of relying on what we're seeing when we actually dig into Portland development data as a sort of as the benchmark, as opposed to just accepting the metro assumptions for the, you know, that went into the regional growth report.
So you've tried to localize it
Yes,
instead of just relying on the regional.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, one follow-up on this. For the Portland permit, 2008 to 19, is that actual?
Yes.
Okay. And the others are modeling assumptions?
The U.S. Energy Information and the DLCD guidebook and even the Metro, again, are more modeling assumptions. The Portland EOA was probably a mix of looking at other modeling assumptions and looking at our development data that was probably in the, I don't know, 2000 to 2012 range. Would be my recollection of what we were looking at then.
Thank you.
I will say, you know, the higher that number is, the more land demand increases. That's how that curve works. All right, I'm gonna let Corinne talk a little bit about small sites.
That will give Tom a break. What also came up in the testimony were folks who were questioning whether we should include smaller sites, whether we hear a lot about demand for 50-plus acres or 15-plus acres. Why include under 3 acres? Is there really demand for that? Are there other folks actually working on those smaller sites? And, you know, acknowledging that interest, we went back and took a look when it comes to the same kind of data sets, the permitting and the QCW data from the state, which is the kind of actual employment numbers. And luckily, we can geocode those right to those areas and those parcels. So I think the next slide helps to give you at least a snapshot of just some examples of what those sites can look like. So a great employer, Timberlab, expanding. They're on, you know, an under 2 acre site. We have some warehouses being developed in the last couple of years that are under an acre, under a half acre. I think one of the themes of the conversation recently is just we have less land, so people make it work on less land. When you have more land, you will take up more space. But I think in an urban area, you can see folks saying, okay, we can't maybe fit that 18-wheeler onto a half acre site, but we can use our box trucks. You know, there's a lot of ways you can make these sites work. Oftentimes what you see are those high bays are you know, in high demand these days. So I think the next slide gets into the actual numbers. So this is interesting. I think only around 15% of the acreage in the industrial area is these under 3 acre sites. But what we're seeing there is when you look at the types of industries on those sites, as a percentage of the total, you're seeing actually 20% of the jobs in construction are on those smaller sites. So above average there. Above average number of manufacturing are actually on those smaller sites. Some of that wholesale trade and transportation warehousing as well, although, you know, yes, the warehousing transportation does prefer much larger sites. So we're not seeing as much of that But when we dig into the data, when it comes to permitting, when it comes to actual employment, and you can actually layer those onto the size of sites, we see plenty of employment that you would consider industrial and not just sort of retailers or some other office space on these sites. These are, I think, we would consider to be traditional industrial users. So we still believe that utilizing the under 3 acres as part of our supply makes sense. I mean, we're seeing the usage of that, so our conclusion is still, we think that's defensible in terms of including that in our supply calculations.
Ask a few. One, just the top, it's, the third column over is greater than 3 acres, correct?
No,
It
that's,
is less than 3
that's the,
acres.
so if you read right to left,
Okay,
all site sizes in the industrial geographies, that's all the large sites, everything. And then compare that to the less than 3 acre sites. And then we break out the less than 3 acre sites into the 1 to 3 acre sites and the less than 1 acre site. Because we had specific testimony, I believe from the Port of Portland, saying we should eliminate the less than 1 acre site from our analysis. And this is just a way of showing that, yes, in fact, there is employment there, there's been recent development, there is demand for these small, extra small sites, and that we think it's appropriate to keep those in the analysis.
okay, great, thank you. That obviates my other questions.
Next.
Sarah? Is there any other small site questions?
The less than 3 acre sites were included previously in previous EOAs.
Yes. Trying to think.
Seems like
Yeah,
an interesting thing to poke at.
We'll have to confirm
Yeah.
how low
check.
we went
Okay.
with that.
In the upcoming business cycle, based on available data, or maybe this is too much speculation, but do you guys foresee being smaller industrial sites making up the majority of future industrial job growth, or just can't really tell yet?
Can't tell. I mean, I think we are trying to go off the actuals as much as we can. So I would say we're assuming a similar proportion would be smaller sites. I know there has been a lot of, again, demand for those larger sites from warehousing, but we think it'll be a similar mix.
I see. All right, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Okay.
So we also had some questions or comments about whether the supply is currently available, whether that short-term land is available outside of smaller sites, just our industrial sites in general. So we were able to kind of break down what is, in this table you can see what's constrained, what's unconstrained, what's vacant land. I think the easiest way to understand this table is we consider in the short term there's at least around 393, around 400 acres that are what we consider to be unconstrained. And then another 350 with some constraints, I think it's under 25% constrained. And it gets a little complicated in here, but this is looking from 2020 to 2030. As you can see in those middle rows, what we saw actually in the first half of this decade was maybe 359 acres were developed, and we currently, as part of our supply calculation, have 747 that we consider is available. Again, I think around 400 we would consider to be unconstrained. I think we looked at CoStar, and there's 200 or some currently being marketed, so we think over the next 5 years there's sufficient short-term supply.
questions? Otherwise, we can keep rolling. All right, the other issue that came up in testimony was with respect to steep slopes and our constraint and our methodology for that, which was where 25% of the parcel area has slopes greater than 25%. That's been what we constrained as being steeply sloped. It was pointed out in testimony that the most recent Metro Urban Growth Report used 10% slopes as the cutoff for industrial areas. And so we think that is an appropriate way, again, trying to be consistent. So we're looking into that. I will say it's been a little bit more complicated than we expected. And this is an example of the GIS layer that we're looking at for 10% slope. And what you see here is it's picking up landscape berms and ditches and loading docks and sometimes buildings. That's all to say that we're working with Metro and our GIS section to try and revise this and update this slope data and to see what impact it will have through our constraint analysis. It will sort of reduce the industrial land supply, but we'll bring back more information at the April 14th meeting to explore this issue further, but just wanted to put it on your radar screen that we think this is a significant issue that probably warrants an adjustment, and we'll bring back a deeper analysis for the next meeting.
Excuse me, can I?
Please.
You didn't call on me, I just spoke up. Didn't raise my hand. So it's an adjustment in the amount of land that is constrained? Which way is the adjustment likely to go?
Moving from if you think a 25% slope is a very steep slope and 10% is a steep slope, not a gentle slope, so moving that means the constraint, the area that comes under that constraint is going to expand, and in turn will reduce our industrial land capacity. We're just trying to figure out by how much and where.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm curious why do you have any thoughts as to why Metro chose 10% and we chose 25%?
25% is it's a legacy assumption, and it's a common assumption that it's applied to residential zoning. You think West Hills and being able to build and cantilever out. But in traditional industrial development, it becomes you don't cantilever buildings very much. You sometimes do retaining walls and grading and filling. And so this actually came up as a discussion point in the 2024 Metro Urban Growth Report, where they dug deeper into their assumptions and they made this sort of switch during the adoption phase based on those discussions and that analysis. And it's just something we did not pick up on and carry over that assumption into our work in 2025 in a way that we probably should have. All right, marine industrial land.
Yeah. So 5-6 years ago, VPS solicited a port. We got some funding to do so. And we hired Eco Northwest to do a look at the kind of larger marine demand that was out there. And this is obviously a difficult year to be projecting this out, 2020. So they went and talked to different actors related to those marine dependent uses. There was sort of a cargo-driven indicators, and they essentially set out a wide scenario of outcomes that could happen for the marina. We, as we'll get into, think that we have aligned quite a bit with the Mila study. Obviously, it is later. We are trying to keep a consistent methodology with the way that we're projecting land demand. So our approach has been not to try to sort of ad hoc adjust our land demand based on different areas and different studies of different times and try and keep it consistent. And not only consistent, but also what OED prefers. So we're using the state's preferred approach to projecting demand for these lands. So you go to the next slide. To the right there is where we're projecting. So, and this is specifically the sort of industrial land demand and those marine lands. So the Mila had scenarios that saw quite a bit of decline in those areas, in the harbor areas. We did not see the same outcomes as that. And then Mila also said, well, and if everything goes as planned, if the Superfund moves, if there's investment, if there's regulation, you could see a demand for 600 plus, acres that need to be developed. Within our process, we were not taking those same assumptions in terms of, hey, from what you can tell, Superfund is moving, but it's not unlocking a lot of new land. Maybe that will happen, but currently we're not seeing that. We haven't seen dramatic changes in regulation or investment that would allow us to be that bullish in terms of what we think is going to happen. So we kind of fit more in the middle of where the Mila's range was. And again, it's more based on actuals, it's more based on kind of recent development trends. Next slide. One of the comments we got was, hey, the cargo demand has gone up recently. Why aren't you tracking that and showing that to be driving more demand for expansion? And this is the port's reported numbers on cargo increases of the last 20 years or so. And it's jumps up and down quite a bit. It's, it did have a nice year in 24 and then has been pretty flat this year. So what our understanding is that these are large step-up developments that you tend to not do small expansions, you would do large terminal expansions, and you would need to see a large sort of consistent trend of growth to do those kinds of developments. And we haven't seen that in their data that says, hey, this is consistently showing we're out of current capacity. This is essentially, we've been using the same range, the historic range over the last 10, 20 years. And we haven't seen in the permit data either anyone recently expanding. And what the Mila study did do a great job of describing is how many terminal operators are investing in their operations to increase the capacity of their current footprints. So when we looked into some of those cargo numbers too, there was nothing, there's some trends that show that certain periods have been stronger than others, but we don't think there's consistently enough indicators that show that there is clearly going to be a stronger growth in our kind of marine dependent users. That being said, we completely agree with the Mila when it comes to the value of our harbor, that this isn't something you can move to other parts of the state. It's got a lot of built-in infrastructure. The rail connections are impossible to replicate. So we are going to refine kind of how we describe, I guess, the value of those lands and how we can, I think, further leverage them and sort of retain that asset. But we think there are investments that hopefully can further that. And as I think Damila said, and as, I think include a quote here from Vigor, a great employer in that area, really what changes the trajectory is funding from legislative bodies, really investment in that area. We don't, that's going to be more of the trigger in unlocking more of those lands. So any questions when it comes to the MILA or our usage or not usage of some of the scenarios?
A couple of questions bound in ignorance, because that's the value that I provide. Are there, when you were talking earlier about diversification, marine diversification, is there a scenario in which like some diversification of marine lands would, even out or even improve, like grow that you saw in your data?
Would it improve the demand for marine dependent users?
Maybe like,
Well, I think what the Mila report really showed, and what because the Superfund work and the liability around that created so much uncertainty, we haven't seen, and even back in 2020, we weren't seeing a lot of development in the harbor. And so what the report was trying to get is to like, okay, businesses, assume for a moment that the Superfund has been resolved. We've got mitigation plans, the liability's been allocated. If that isn't a barrier to development, what are the growth opportunities for your businesses? It was trying to get beyond that constraint. So in that sense, it was an unconstrained look at what the future might be. What we're trying to is to both recognize the importance of the harbor for the local economy, the regional economy, the state economy, and the importance of in continuing to invest in the infrastructure and resolving the Superfund and sort of keep going. I look back at 2016 when we did this EOA, we were all like, oh yeah, by 2035, the Superfund will be all resolved and everything will be good. And people were like, are you sure about that? And we're in the same position. Like, we're getting closer, but we're not there. It's not, we don't have approved mitigation plans. We don't have liability allocated. And so we're trying to sort of look ahead of what might be possible and show that, yes, we need to solve these real constraints on development to realize that opportunity that might be out there. But we want to do that in a qualitative way, not in a numerical way, because it is still too fuzzy.
yeah. Thank you.
And we're not projecting a decline. We're seeing 100 acres maybe in that overall in that area would be developed. Sorry, yeah, we should probably keep moving.
Oh, sorry, I did that to us.
I'm sorry, any questions?
Questions
Sorry,
on this
yeah.
issue?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. Community livability scenarios. So again, one issue that came up during the EOA process has been what to do with our sort of industrial residential edge and how we can better address the industrial development that backs up to residential areas. We explored in the discussion draft 2 different scenarios based on 2 different buffers. Again, this is one of those future projects, right? We've done a little bit of work on concepts and what that project might look like, but we haven't done the detailed planning work and engagement that has gone into the CCIL project. So in some ways, we're trying to forecast a future impact based on a future decision, but that's how we want to at least begin to account for that in and anticipate that future decision in the EOA. So some of the concepts that we've been looking at are looking at a 500-foot area along those residential industrial edges, and what additional development standards could come into play that would make that industrial development friendlier to the residential and not be as impactful. And that is things like wider setbacks, deeper landscape buffers, taller walls and screening. We've looked at things, measures that California has taken, which is, for example, no driveways between the residential boundary and the building. So you don't have trucks circulating right next to that residential boundary. No loading docks facing that residential area. So you have truck idling right up against that residential buffer. So there are a lot of different development standards that we could bring into play to make the industrial development present a friendlier face to that residential edge to reduce those impacts. I think what we heard in the public testimony is a lot of concern about other issues that are harder to get at through the zoning code and through how development is oriented on a particular site. But we list a few here that really looks at whose responsibility is that, and that some of that depending for truck traffic and freight access and transportation safety, that clearly falls on PBOT, and depending on if it's a state highway or not, falls to ODOT. The air emissions, I think we also heard, one of the difficulties is that warehouses and trucks are not considered what they call a point source for air pollution. They're a mobile source. And so consequently, DEQ does not regulate warehouses much as they would a manufacturing facility, say with a traditional smokestack. They regulate the emissions coming from the vehicle itself, but they don't look at or think about what it means when you have a whole bunch of those vehicles in one site. I think the role that the city could play in that is continue to lobby our state representatives to have direct DEQ to make a change on how they regulate warehouses as a stationary air pollution source. The other is noise, and again, we do have some noise enforcement codes that is partly the city and partly DEQ. It tends to be a standards-based compliance, and so there are some city levers there to be applied as part of noise regulations. That said, oh yeah.
Yeah, Tom, I'm wondering about HVAC requirements. I know we've talked about that in other projects with residential setbacks. I'm imagining some warehouses specifically, food related, have pretty hefty refrigeration and HVAC equipment. Is that something that's within the bounds of what we could look at? Or would that fall to another agency?
Good question. My initial guess is that that falls more under the building code, but we could explore, what that means. That's sort of the type of question issue that we would explore as part of the project itself to figure out, well, do we have a noise lever that we could put into the zoning code? Do we have again, we can have regulations about where the driveways and loading docks are on the site. When you get off the site and where the trucks all go, that gets a little harder to regulate through the zoning code. We have PBOT and their right-of-way standards help guide that more. So, but that sort of, could we or couldn't we regulate the type of HVAC or the noise coming from the HVAC system? That would be an issue that we would explore through the project itself. All we're trying to do is anticipate that, yes, it could have an impact on the type of businesses that might locate within that 500-foot project area, if you will. So we did look at that 500-foot buffer width, and what we wanted to do is at least initially understand who might be impacted and how significant would that impact be. And again, the difference between the high scenario and the low scenario is, under the high scenario, we looked at all of the industrial sites within 500 feet. And in the low scenario, we only looked at sites that were 5 acres or more, thinking that those tend to be the larger, more impactful industrial developments. A 5-acre site can get you about 100,000 square foot warehouse building or some other industrial building. And so we were trying to look at, well, what is the difference between those two levels? And you see here that it can have a pretty significant difference in, on the one hand, we don't have a lot of 5-acre sites in that 500-foot edge. That's the good news. Not a lot of potential large impactful developments coming. But on the other hand, we do have a lot of smaller sites that could be impacted by that. And there's more in the memo. There's more a deeper analysis, if you will, about the acres and the amount of both, not just only buildable land, but overall industrial acreage. I think it's up to a quarter of our total industrial zoning is within this 500-foot buffer. So this can have a potentially significant impact on not only future growth, but existing businesses when they do go to expand. So I'll leave it there for additional questions about this issue.
Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you. So Tom, are you assuming that for the larger sites that there would not be any permissible development within the 500-foot buffer zone? So it's effectively just totally taken out of the buildable land inventory?
No, what we did, and again, this is sort of a proxy, is that we applied a constraint factor similar to if you had a conservation E-zone, that it's not impossible to develop, but there is a little bit of friction. There are some constraints, some development standards that you have to work around that might reduce the capacity. I gotta have a deeper setback or a bigger buffer, or just that there would be enough that would cause some industrial developers and some uses to say that might not work for me, or that's too expensive. So we incorporated a similar, I believe it's a 30% discount on the capacity to reflect sort of the similar thinking or adjustments or avoidance of that area that might take place along that edge.
Okay. So you presented some potential strategies, but the actual strategies are not defined yet?
No, they're not defined, and really they're not constrained. So I think one of the things that we heard in the community testimony is that somehow having the EOA only be based or incorporate the low scenario would somehow lock that in. And what we wanted to do by including the low scenario, again, is to, one, focus on the most impactful development. But two, to the extent that there continues to be surplus capacity, even though we've assumed the low scenario, that a future project could be more restrictive than the low scenario, and sort of eat into that surplus capacity, use up some of that surplus capacity. But that we don't really know enough right now to know what that package is or might be, and that so again, we're trying to have a crystal ball. We know it's going to have an impact. We're trying to account for some of that. To the extent that we incorporate some of that impact into the EOA and we still have a surplus, that would really allow us, give us the freedom to go further as part of that in a more substantive, definitive, should we do this or should we do that type of situation, similar to what we're looking at with the CCIL project. We just haven't done enough work. We haven't had enough discussions with the community, with the businesses, to really understand what's going to be effective, what's going to be impactful in terms of development standards, to really dial that in a way that we have, like with the CCIL project.
Okay. Is there a project that is visible on the horizon that does this, or is this just trying to like lock in some sort of provision that if and when, like in the next 5 to 7 years, that something does move forward, that we've accounted for that in our assumption?
I think this is where, again, the sort of other half of the EOA and those strategies, action steps that we've identified to sort of implement these assumptions or to take advantage of that economic opportunity that we see out there. One of those strategies is actually to address this community livability issue, the buffer edge. It is not clear when in our work program. This is the first step to really get this definitively on sort of council's radar and to give us direction to go do this project. So we're building towards that. The time frame itself is hard to pin down, but this is the first step. And this is similar to sort of the weight that CCIL has. We're hoping to avoid is like, okay, yeah, great, we want to do this community livability buffer project, but you're going to have to wait for the next DOA update. We don't want to get stuck in that situation.
Thank you, Chair Rout. Yeah, I just really wanted to emphasize, I think Tom has made this point, but just to really emphasize that when it comes to any of the other topics that we're discussing, other than the environmental zone project on the Columbia Corridor, this is just staff's attempt at this moment to estimate the potential impact. But it's not, we don't know enough to definitively say. We're just trying to demonstrate that there's this much room in the industrial land, and these other projects have the potential to have this kind of impact. It's just showing that there's actually room to have those conversations, and we're just trying to lay the groundwork for that. I also would say that the actions are really important, an important aspect of the EOA, because that will really, we will be looking hopefully to get some guidance from council as the EOA goes to council to prioritize some of those actions and help us. There's a lot of actions in there, but we're hoping to get a sense from them about the level of priority of these various actions and when they want us to kind of start to work on the various actions. So that is the importance of the package as a whole, right? Is like demonstrating that there's room to have a conversation, and please give us the guidance on what to prioritize.
Commissioner Thompson, did you have any follow-ups?
I'm good for now, thank you.
Vice Chair Spivak.
Thank you all. Director Diefenster, sorry, I'm getting your name right, Diefendorfer, made me think of a question, is that when this goes to council, do you give, there'll be a list of follow-up projects. And is there any way to label those projects with rough amount of staff time it takes? Like, because if I were on city council, I'm not, I'd want to figure out and try and, impact versus staff time might be a factor. So just a little plug, if there's some way to communicate that, it might be useful for them to have that information because you don't have staff to do everything on the list or,
Yeah.
you know.
That's a good suggestion. We'll look at that. As you know, now there's the table of action associated with each of the geographies. We can consider whether there might be some opportunity to show the level of impact of they're not all equal in terms of, the resources and staff time they would take. So that's a good suggestion.
Any other questions? To recap, community livability is a part of the EOA cinematic universe that has not yet reached us, and that in our transmittal letter, we can advocate for it and if possible, suggest how much staff capacity that would require in order to do. Okay, great.
I think Erica's back up.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I do actually have one more. I'm looking at the recommended next step for the community livability policy now. And I noticed that it doesn't list DEQ for partners. And I'm sort of wondering about that because in testimony, one of the greatest themes about community livability was air quality. And just looking at some of the tools that exist in the zoning toolbox, there's historically been a lot of challenge with trying to do anything with air quality with buffers or walls or screening. And so it seems like there would need to be some engagement with DEQ to address what I think is really the prevailing concern that I heard in testimony, which was about diesel particulates. So just curious about that.
Yeah, we can add them, and I think any process we would include them as well. Good suggestion. Okay.
Good catch.
Anything else on this issue?
Good, thank you.
Okay, one more that we have queued up for you. There was some testimony around sort of the regional economy and doing a regional EOA or being better coordinated. And so we had a little bit of data that this is mainly based on a commute data set. But it recognizes that we do live in a regional economy. And so what this says is that, of the people that work in Portland, 60% of them live outside of Portland. They're coming from some other city in the region. And that of the people that live in Portland, adult working age people that live in Portland, 43% of them go outside of Portland for their work. So there's a lot of commute back and forth in our regional economy. And I just wanted to recognize that. The difficulty comes with Goal 9 and the Goal 9 rules and the fact that especially for a lot of this, implementation is done at the local level. And that the Goal 9, the requirements are on individual cities and counties to do that. There is sort of this encouragement process that if you want to, you can go do a regional EOA and with the vision that, Salem and Kaiser would get together and figure out the forecast for there and split it all up. I can't imagine doing that for 24 cities, 3 counties, and Metro, and being able to do that in a coordinated way, and then still have us make decisions about the CCIL and how that impacts the industrial land and so that said, we do still do a lot of coordination within the region. Metro and the Greater Portland Inc. is the economic development agency for the region. They do the, what is the SEDS called? The Community Economic Development Strategy, that they go through a process every 5 years. That makes us eligible for federal grants from the Economic Development Agency. We work with Business Oregon, and Metro does a little bit. And in fact, at Metro, there is a current discussion with Metro Council and other partners in the region on how Metro can serve a greater role in helping to coordinate and helping with industrial land readiness. So I think a lot of that all is more informal coordination. But at the end of the day, and this has been an ongoing theme, is that, we need to update Goal 9, and sort of the state needs to update Goal 9 and recognize what it means to be in the 21st century. That hasn't happened yet. So I think we're back at, we have what's in front of us. This is what we need to do to make the decisions that we want to make, especially in terms of protecting natural resources or protecting our residential areas. And so we're still left with doing a Portland EOA. That's what we had queued up for you this evening. We're close to time. But are there other issues? Again, we're back on April 14th. We'll bring back more information. But if there are other issues you want us to address, please let us know. And we'll continue to sort of respond and bring additional information so that you can make an informed recommendation.
Commissioner Brandon.
Yeah, I've had a few things just listed because I wanted you to get through everything, and then I think now we can discuss. Is that kind of the okay? One thing I've noticed, at least with workforce in the future, is that there's a lot less retirements happening. So have you taken that into consideration for the fact that people can't afford to retire anymore, and so they continue working, and that means there's more space being utilized? That's one.
I think what we've seen is the other way around, that with an aging population, where is the labor and workforce going to come from? So I think we've seen more concerns on access to labor than having too much labor because people are working longer. But I get what you're saying in terms of the affordability questions and the lack of retirement savings. Can I even afford to retire? I can't afford to live on Social Security. What am I going to do? So I don't think that really
No, I think that
factors.
maybe the short answer is that's not a variable that we adjust locally. We have a big model, but we're not trying to figure out retirement age. So we're dependent on, again, some of the state's projections for overall jobs. So it is an interesting question for them, what their assumptions are on that.
Yeah, have you talked to a millennial and our prospects of when we were going to retire? Because it's not looking great. And then the other side of that is looking younger, is that, I work with hundreds of youth throughout the year in workforce development. I cannot imagine any of them considering themselves going into working warehouses and industrialization, to the point that many Gen Z and Alpha are doing gig economy, interesting side platforms like Poshmark and Mercari and Goodwill Bins and resell and vintage stuff. They're not interested in this. They'll go make websites as a side consultant before they'll go be in a warehouse and go back in history to industrialization. It's a little alarming to see that. And the only way I can see is, there's a draw in the amount of people wanting fulfillment centers and the jobs for that, but there's also automation, and I think that's the work we want robots doing, not putting our bright young futures and minds into warehouses.
But the Poshmark, side gig needs someone to deliver that item to the house. So that, you know, all that stuff is going to be interrelated sometimes to delivery.
As we defund the post office, like, I mean, I'm just, the connections don't add up. So when I think of youth, there was one principal who was in the testimony who was like, this is not what the youth want. Is that any part of your assessment, evaluation on future of the job?
I think what we've seen is it goes the other way, that interest in the trades, and maybe not so much the warehouse jobs, but certainly the manufacturing jobs, the welding jobs, that don't require a college degree, that require a little bit of training, some on-the-job training, some apprenticeship work, that there is sort of strong growing interest in that. You don't have to get saddled with student debt. So, you know, and I think that's where, at least what I've seen, you have a big sort of aging out of the workforce and needing to replace that. And yes, some of that can be automated, but electricians and plumbers and carpenters are not going to be automated anytime soon.
No. And then also work from home, is that something considered at all? Because I try not to, no, I'm just going to stop about how often I go to the office or not.
So,
twice a week.
yeah,
Anyhow.
I mean, we factored that in by reducing the office demand, right? That we figured that businesses, not necessarily fully remote work that we track, but you know, the more hoteling of office space, you know, that offices are going to shrink their footprint because people are working from home 2-3 days a week kind of thing. So I don't need as much office space, and we'll see how that plays out. Again, that's one of those emerging trends, you know, and how is that going to play out in terms of office demand? We think we have a little bit of buffer there because we have so much vacant office that if we're not assuming we need you know, if we're low on our estimates, that we have a buffer to fill there.
Yeah, it's still a little alarming with the amount of like office space that is not in Portland that more companies are opting to use, in like Tualatin, Lake Oswego, and places outside of Portland, if they don't have to deal with the same remediation and development struggles to get through what it means to be a business in Portland. So how is that assumed?
I think, you know, again, that goes into both the OED forecast for the region and overall office development and what sort of our share has been. We might be at this moment in time, we're a little optimistic on that. I will say since my time in Portland, I've seen it go through cycles where like Oswego and Cruz Way have been very popular and filling, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to be in the Pearl and downtown and in Central East Side and urban setting, and now they don't, you know, and so it's hard to predict that. I think we have the luxury that we have plenty of office space. We have plenty of room to grow more office space. It's not that sort of pointed policy decision in a way that the industrial land questions are.
And not to go on a tangent, but within the zoning code, and you can just clarify this for me, the use of said industrial zones and warehouses for bad things that are happening in the country, we don't have any leeway in addressing that into zoning code right now. Question.
If you are getting at the use of warehouses as detention facilities, that is a conditional use in our zoning code now today. And they would have, any proposed use would have to go through a conditional use process with all of the public scrutiny and input that would go into that.
One quick note that I think you bring up is, I think almost all of the conversation today has been about the industrial lands. When the EOA does cover, you know, the downtown, work from home, business districts, we're happy to talk more about those other areas too, if there's an interest next time.
I'm done.
Vice Chair Pollock and then Vice Chair Spivak.
I will say, as the resident Gen Zer on the commission, that I kind of agree with staff, at least anecdotally. There has been, at least among people I know of my age range, a consistent interest in trades as they are the lowest barrier entry to a decent amount of income. I know personally a lot of people that I went to high school and with stuff, college was either unattainable to them or just simply not in their interest. It kept with them. But I also agree with Commissioner Brannon. The gig economy is real. You really, that is, most people feel like, I think, especially as young people, like that is a last resort option, not really anyone's first choice. And I've noticed, again, somewhat anecdotally, that people in my age cohort, as we grow older, actually do demonstrate more interest in these sort of warehousing, distribution jobs, which are at risk of automation and everything. But I think the gig economy burns people out very quickly. And I feel like a lot of people have made sort of the cost benefit analysis that they would rather be doing these jobs that, you may not have much hope for advancement in and everything versus kind of being on your own essentially. And so, yeah, that is what I would say to account in the future of that younger people will, as time goes on, demonstrate interest in these jobs. That's just my 2 cents.
I'm curious how we should consider giving feedback on this as it goes from us to council. And I'm thinking back on the housing production strategy where we didn't do any action with that project, but with each of the implementation things, there was like a time frame for how long they would take, or there was some way of indicating which one was going to happen first. And in this project, for each of the areas, there's a list of implementation, who the partner is, but no indication of what the priority is unless you put them in order from like first. Is the first one on the list the highest priority? I'm not sure. And so within the central city, there's like talking about the waterfront, there's talking about this. With the neighborhoods, business districts, they're talking about working from home, there's talking about like, there's just a list. And I'm wondering whether it would be, like, should we weigh in on like, should we highlight some things we think are important? Or are you hoping it just goes to the list of council and then council will figure out what the priority is? Or like, I'm trying to figure out how you, it feels different from other projects. The TSP, where there's always like this ranking of implementation, and this one just feels kind of nebulous, like who's gonna decide?
Commissioner Spivak, I'll try to address that if that's okay. I think that I think it's the nature of the beast. I think that there are so many things on that list that I think we, as staff, do need some direction from elected leadership and leadership of the city generally. I also believe that if you wanted to express kind of from the commission's vantage point what some of the priorities are, I think we'd be happy to note that. That's something that we could do in the transmittal letter potentially, is maybe pick some high, not like prioritize the entirety of the list, but just pick some of the more, what this commission views to be the higher priority items. So we're happy to talk through that when we talk about transmittal letter. I do think that it is the nature, it's a decision about the both the staffing resources that are available and how they will be used, right? So we really do need some direction from the council on that.
Okay, that helps. I mean, it's inevitable there's triage going to happen. And I was trying to figure out, should we recommend that you prioritize within the categories? Actually, that would have been my first choice, coming into this. But we spent our bandwidth talking about the industrial areas, right? Which is understandable. That's where we got the public testimony about that. I think in hindsight, it would have been we could have said, well, actually, within the 4 items in the central city, these are the ones to put at the top of the list, or to do within 1 to 2 years instead of 3 to 5 years. But recognizing where we are now, that makes sense. This is only going to transmittal letter, and maybe we should give ourselves, if we want to take this on as a commission, a chance to have a more discussion about it than we usually do for transmittal letters, because we haven't been talking about that piece of this project, which is, in my humble opinion, one of the biggest important things about this project. I mean, I understand that the risk of litigation is, and future, it has a lot to do with how we project the number of jobs and how we path out in industrial areas what's going to happen next. So I understand that was the focus, but I'm thinking about overall, I kind of care where staff puts scarce resources in terms of the list of to-do items. So I hope we have a chance, maybe in our deliberation next time, to just go through each, there's like 5 areas or something like that, and just see what's on the list of each one, and we could all look at that ahead and see what we think are, if we want to give a signal to council that these are the key items. That'd be great.
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles, great. And thank you, Vice Chair Spivak.
I'm not exactly sure what to do with the comment I'm about to make. Maybe it is to find a way to incorporate it in our recommendation to council. I think as I've read the EOA and the CCIL and the appendixes, I think my discomfort, can be summed up this way. It feels like we're trying to do the minimum amount of land, industrial land necessary, not the maximum possible. And I appreciate that this is how Goal 9 is framed, is you're just about, you have to demonstrate an adequate supply of industrial land to fit the economic needs of the city. And I think you've done a really great job in what you've just gone through with us in recognizing some of the objections that have been raised and finding ways to address it. So I think that's all good. But I say this I frame it that way for this reason. I really wish the city would be intentional about the kinds of jobs that the industrial areas can produce. These middle wage jobs, which in Appendix C, you go into a fair amount of detail about how they really fit into a place that is not been focused on. We have a lot of growth in low-income jobs, a lot of growth in high-income jobs, but we haven't had the kind of emphasis on these middle-income jobs. And this really relates to affordability in the city. We spend a lot of our time as policymakers, and the city council does, talking about the affordability of housing and things like that. But the other way for things to be more affordable is with more income. And that's why I think these jobs are just really important. So I wish, just as a general framework, we could be more intentional about trying to drive those jobs. And that's why I'm really interested in maximizing the amount of industrial land that's available. The other components for me are, one, we're currently in a situation where we're losing jobs in the region and in Multnomah County in particular. That's real. And so, again, being intentional about trying to create more jobs, I think, is really important. And finally, there is a connection to another problem we have at the city, which is revenues. These are jobs and these are businesses that can create more income tax revenue and more property tax revenue at a time when we're certainly experiencing some constraints. So again, I don't know where I'll go with all of this, but it's just, I wanted to communicate to my colleagues that these are things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, Vice Chair Spivak.
Thank you. I think I want to mostly agree, I actually entirely agree with the value of the industrial sector jobs, and we want to encourage it. And I also think that staff is doing a lot of what you've requested. Like, we've had 0.7% year-on-year growth rate in industrial lands going back 20 years. And despite the fact that we have decreasing jobs in the area, they're projecting half the job grade going forward. They're still projecting more, a faster rate, 9.9% in the next 20 years in industrial land jobs. So I think despite the fact that we're running into economic challenges as a region, I think it's frankly very optimistic or maybe even dubious that we're going to expand industrial area uses faster in the next 20 years than we have the past 20 years. But that's what these projections show. So I feel like staff's doing a pretty, like, even maybe a bolder job than I would in terms of being optimistic about industrial growth and jobs.
while we're going through things that keep us up at night, one of the things similar, I think to echo what I've heard a number of my colleagues say is, the rise of manufacturing, or not manufacturing, but warehousing and distribution as a share of industrial lands, particularly around COVID, and COVID +3, has been worrying to me, in part for these reasons, that it is, the last I was chatting with a friend, we were talking before we convened. I was chatting with a longtime friend on Friday who has been doing warehousing, has tried to get away from it by going into the gig economy, might have to go back into warehousing because the nature of gigs is so cyclical, as is the nature of a lot of trade jobs, which are the more obviously desirable jobs, but they require, in order to have iron workers or electricians open up an apprenticeship, there has to be a pipeline of specific projects on the horizon, and that does require different sets of land. So it is really dependent, and so how to even out the cyclical nature of those really desirable jobs for folks who do not need or want college attainment necessarily, or they want a different career shift. But warehousing and distribution has been our biggest increased use. And what does that mean for the future of our greenhouse gas emissions? What does that mean for neighborhood traffic? Because a lot of that is last mile, right? So I think about that a lot, and I do think that there are the industrial lands. There's a bit of me. I'd love to talk about accessory commercial units, but I think we might not get there. We won't get there today. But that industrial, because it is so constrained and it is on land that has so many competing tensions, and that how do we have a thriving industrial city that also lives in harmony with nature, and how do we have all of those competing tensions together? So I appreciate that we're spending a lot of time on industrial lands, because it is our teeniest. It should be larger. I am a little concerned that we are brushing up on margins, because it also does have. We're seeing we're seeing conversations in the state legislature about what is our relationship to our industrial lands. So those are things that keep me up at night. It is the reason that I will get up at 2 a.m. Once again. Are there any last, Director Diefendorfer, is it a new hand? Sorry, we waxed poetic.
No problem. I wanted you to do that, and certainly look forward to hearing from others if there are comments. I know we do have to move on. I just wanted to address some of Commissioner Knowles's latest comments, to say that we have to consider the function that the EOA plays, and then the role of other policy documents like the Advanced Portland 5-year economic development strategy. So I just want to make sure that the commission is kind of cognizant that the EOA, it looks at that sort of bigger 20-year projection for purposes of identifying and making sure that there's adequate land, but it's really the more short-term economic development strategy that does the things that you were describing, Commissioner Knowles, about thinking about how do we target, be much more deliberate about the types of jobs that we're trying to attract as a city, and that those jobs are hopefully the kind of middle wage, career ladder kinds of jobs where people can grow into the job, into higher wage positions without necessarily having a college degree. So what we've done with this EOA is actually try to, in trying to balance shift the balance between the warehouse and production jobs and the manufacturing warehouse and distribution jobs and the manufacturing and production jobs, we're trying to really align more with the city's economic development strategy, which is really trying to go after those target industries and attract those kinds of jobs. So they're meant to work hand in hand, but they serve very different functions. So I just want to make sure that when in considering the EOA, that you're kind of, being mindful of the other opportunities through that exist through, for example, the shorter term economic development strategy, which there is an existing advanced Portland plan, and I believe that there's an interest in soon undertaking an update of that. So that'll be another opportunity. And as we've been saying, the EOA itself is supposed to be updated every 5 to 7 years. So we look back at we have to be informed by actual trends, but if we are able to update it with the regular intervals that we hope to, we can sort of correct for those trends over time. And so we don't have to view any one EOA as like this is like the ultimate, we have to, it has to be right for the next 20 years. I mean, that's actually not the objective in a way, right? We want to have those interim opportunities to reevaluate. So I just wanted to provide some of that context. Thank you.
All right, any last words? This will not be our last bite of the apple by any means. We'll be dining on apples for a very long time. Okay, so thank you both so much. Thank you, Tom, thank you, Corinne. And we'll continue this, not in March, but in April, April 14th. And with that, with the long-suffering Jeff Cottle and Daniel Subbing here to talk about the Columbia Corridor industrial land. Thank you very much.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, wait, sorry, Commissioner Thompson.
I have a quick disclosure about the Port of Portland, which I shared at our last meeting, which is that I'm an employee at an architecture firm and a shareholder at that firm that does work with the port and will likely do work with the port in the future. They provided testimony on several specific sites. Included in those sites are properties that we may endeavor to try to do more work on in the future. And so if there are any proposed amendments that relate to those sites, I will likely recuse myself at that time.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, because I actually wrote disclosures on the thing. So thank you. Does anyone else have any disclosures they would like to make? I like to sit at the arrivals area and see how many people bring flowers. Okay. Daniel and Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you. Take us away.
So we will continue our marathon. Thanks for having us again. My name is Jeff Cottle. I am the supervising planner of the River Environmental Team at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability.
And I am Daniel Sobing, environmental planner on the River Environmental Planning Team with Jeff.
Yeah, so tonight, I think to what Chief Planner Diefendorfer said, we will come back at the next session to go through, as you have seen through the testimony, there are a lot of individual requests related to properties, specific properties, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of the site visits and things like that. But so we will come back and make recommendations on each of those in our next session because we're still working through them and there are a lot of them. And also, since only the record closed on February 3rd, we want to make sure we take enough time to investigate and look into all of the different properties. So this session is really looking at kind of more generally some of the things that we have heard from folks more on a kind of a higher level and trying to provide you with some of the background as to why with some of the testimony that you see, why those things are, the changes that are proposed, why they are proposed. So since we haven't been here in a while, we'll start off with a little bit of a review of the project and try to go through that relatively quickly, especially with our time. But then The other items are really looking at how, a lot of it is how do existing E-zone requirements apply, or so the second item is really like, how do those apply to, if we say, for example, we're expanding an environmental zone onto a property, what does it mean for existing development and things like that? For those of you who have been around here for a while, and have been working on these floodplain requirements, we just want to revisit the FEMA biological opinion floodplain requirements, because there are a lot of areas where the expansions, especially specifically into the conservation overlay zone, are because of those floodplain requirements and our process to apply them across the city. There was some testimony related to our outreach and engagement. Just wanted to review things that we've done and the extensive and years of work that has been going into this project. And then in some of the discussions with commissioners, there was just to again tee up some questions and any requests that we might receive. We wanted to go over the E-zone map correction project, which is the last project that made significant changes to the environmental zones, essentially applied to everywhere except for the industrial zone. So just go over what was done there in terms of the proposals and give you a little background on that. And again, for context in terms of any direction you want to give us moving forward. So just quickly, I'll go through the project proposal just to remind everyone, as a little bit of a refresher, the areas in the orange, primarily the entire corridor. As you know, there are some other miscellaneous properties kind of around the north reach of the Willamette and one property down in Johnson Creek, but primarily we're really talking about the corridor. What the CCIL zone project does, so key piece, modify where environmental zones will be applied, so expand or in some cases reduce application. There are zoning code requirements that are in there, so changes to some amendments to the zoning code, although there's not a huge number of those. A refined methodology for the application of the zones, and that's really part of the kind of what we call the policy question about where are different zones applied. Just a reminder that one key part of this is there's a number of natural resource, and I'll have a slide about this, but there's a number of natural resource management plan documents that apply in the corridor, so we would basically be replacing those with these project documents, as we've gone over that in the past. And then, of course, as you know, after these hour and a half of the previous presentations, we've obviously been working with economic opportunities analysis throughout this whole process. So just for the context in terms of that natural resource management plan replacement, just to say that we have been doing these updates of natural resource management plans since really the first one was in the Columbia Corridor. It's called the Columbia Corridor Industrial Area Natural Resource Management Plan. That's going all the way back to 1989, and some of those things have not changed. So as we talked about in past hearing and briefing, a lot of the area in the corridor haven't updated in a very long time. But we have all these different plans, and specifically the plans that will be replaced, those natural resource protection plans. We presented this slide before in another presentation, but really there's a number of plans that apply to those areas that are in the project area with the project map that we showed. So all of these would be replaced with, again, the new policy direction that would be part of the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands Project. Again, this is like my favorite slide, because clearly I present it every time, but this just shows you again the levers that we pull. The conservation and protection overlay zone. If you remember, the protection overlay zone is the more strict of the two, and really actually an area where it's hard to develop other than where there's a public benefit. Conservation overlay zone is developable, but it does need to minimize, mitigate in terms of your proposals to try to reduce the impacts on natural resources, and then mitigate to address them. Key part of this conversation and these discussions is about what that buffer is, the protection zone specifically, really around resources, and then what might be for conservation zone outside of that as well. So just as a quick reminder, again, in the discussion draft, we had these three different scenarios. Won't go into the detail of them, but really the primary, again, modification between each of these scenarios is how much protection zone was applied is in each of the scenarios. So the first one is really on the resource. We apply the protection zone. Medium was 25 feet generally, more or less, and then high had a 50-foot buffer. And so we basically, through what we are, the proposed draft recommendation is to have a kind of a medium plus. It essentially takes different pieces of the medium and high scenario and really comes to this, where we have a 50-foot protection zone buffer around the streams, sloughs, and wetlands, along, well, we applied to the actual resource, let's say that, and including, so wetlands that are within 50 feet of streams and sloughs and waterways. And then a 50-foot buffer of protection zone around those resources, and then conservation zone essentially to other, what we define as high and medium ranking resources, riparian resources, really the area nearest these waterways and wetlands. And then for streams that we kind of consider isolated, so 50 feet or more from wetlands, we would apply the conservation zone. So again, the more permissible of the two. And then the floodplain requirements within specifically making sure at minimum that the area within 170 feet in the floodplain is within at least the conservation zone. So through the implementation, we have looked at, so again, that we replaced those natural resource management protection plans, and really it was replaced with these individual resource sites. So this is where we, again, look to understand what the specific character is in the separate areas here that are shown, recognizing that they might have different resources and there's different reasons to protect certain things and different development types. I'm not going to go into the details, but again, last time we reviewed some of the modifications we had made in specific areas, including along the Columbia, primarily with with the Port of Portland in terms of the airport and the Portland International Center in terms of their needs in those areas and how we have modified those assumptions and the natural resource protections that would apply there, kind of continuing existing policy decisions that we have had for quite some time. The Columbia South Shore, that was really moving from one environmental structure, which is in the Columbia South Shore Plan District, and then instead of applying those regulations, kind of updating and applying the general environmental zone there, and then some minor tweaks to those areas that are between the Willamette and the corridor, where there are some areas that are basically unprotected at the moment, and we are looking to apply protections to those resources. We also wanted to just revisit, so here we have on the left existing environmental zones. The blue is the conservation overlay zone. The green is the existing protection overlay zone. Just showing within the context of the low, medium, and high scenario, what the implications are for those different proposals. And as you can see, basically similar amount of area under the medium and the proposed draft scenario, even with the high as well, but it's really about where that P zone versus the C zone is, the kind of distribution of P zone versus C zone. Wanted to highlight, obviously, the topic du jour is the industrial sites. So this basically just provides our proposed draft, the change between the existing E zones to the left, so roughly around 1,100 acres. The proposals would bring in, additional 350 acres total. But again, the biggest change is when in the application of the protection zone, largely because, again, as I've mentioned in the past, there's a lot of conservation overlay zone that we weren't applying the P zone in the corridor, and so much of that, even on the resources themselves, we don't have protection zone as it stands right now. So that shift is a lot of it is on the water bodies and wetlands, and so you can see there on the bullet to the bottom right, something to recognize how much of these protection zone and the conservation zone is actually on water bodies or on these steep slopes, as we talked about. So we're really talking about 45% of the proposed application, the proposed zone in the proposed draft is on those, limited, harder to develop areas, and 29% of the conservation zone, which would make sense because we obviously, with the conservation zone, expect it will be developed.
Just since we're just talking about steep slopes and difference, what is the definition of a steep slope in this?
This is 25%.
We use 25. And so, yeah, if we needed to, or if it's illustrative or instructive after this analysis goes through, we can think about what that means for that. But obviously, we think the steeper slopes in terms of natural resources, where we would apply E-zones, are probably more important in our context. But
I think one thing to note too is, Tom showed that slide that shows that kind of dispersed 10% steep slope throughout the sites that was picking up retaining walls and loading docks and things like that. Based on a cursory analysis of looking where steep slopes actually intersect with E-zones, typically that's going to be the bank of the slough. So it's where those intersections are. It really is a non-developable area. So that analysis in that slide that showed the intersection between the proposed E-zones and the steep slopes and water bodies, that typically is really undevelopable land because those are the real steep slopes that are the banks that shouldn't be developed.
And our approach to the steep slope is that we take the 25%, and that's where we would apply an E-zone based on the steep slope character or its intersection with vegetation and things like that.
It's one of the factors that feeds into the natural resource inventory. It's our riparian resource rankings takes into account steep slopes. So in certain circumstances where there's vegetation and proximity to water bodies, those rankings extend further on the basis of steep slopes, and it's the 25% that we use.
Yeah, so I'll pass it over to Daniel just to kind of go over some of the existing E-zone. This is, again, some you probably, if you got through testimony, a lot of these topics have been, and I think some of the oral testimony, just kind of understanding what it means for existing development primarily, and river-related uses with, a new application of the E-zone.
Yeah, and the three topics I want to cover are transition area, regulations and requirements of existing development, and river-dependent, river-related uses. These are all topics that came up repeatedly in various different testimony that was submitted. So starting with transition area, this is a graphic that's in the zoning code chapter that applies to the E-zones. And this really illustrates that the E-zones are divided into these two sub-areas. There's the transition area, which is the outer 25 feet of the E-zones. And then there's the resource area. That's everything that's beyond that first 25 feet. And one common misconception that we've heard both in testimony and when we go out and do face-to-face meetings with property owners is people believe that the P zone doesn't have transition area. People assume that the whole protection zone is undevelopable, but when there's no conservation zone around the outside of that protection zone, that outer 25 feet is transition area. So when that protection zone buffer is extending over a building and there's no conservation zone beyond that, the first 25 feet, which is typically the part that's intersecting with the existing development, is transition area. And the next slide will get into why that's important. So these are some of the regulations that apply. These are in terms of the regulatory teeth of the E-zones, where they're really are protective of resources and potentially restrictive of development, are a few particular things that are listed in this table here. So setbacks from streams, rivers, water bodies, and wetlands. Those setbacks only apply in the resource area. They don't apply in the transition area. There are limits on total disturbance area. Those limits only apply in the resource area, not the transition area. And there are limits on the total number of native trees that you can remove from a site. Those limits only apply in the resource area, not the transition area. So those are the real regulatory teeth of the E-zones, and they don't apply in that transition area. There are development approval processes, and sometimes you can meet standards, sometimes you can, there's exemption standards, and if you can't meet either of those, you go through environmental review. And oftentimes development that goes into the resource area does trigger environmental review. It very rarely does that in the transition area. You're highly unlikely to get into a situation where development that only touches the transition area is going to trigger review. It's usually going to meet standards or just be fully exempt. So there are some requirements that do apply in the transition area that weren't listed in that previous slide. So for instance, if you are removing native trees, any tree at all, there is a tree replacement requirement, and that applies in the transition area. There's just no limit on tree removal, but there are replacement requirements. The lighting standards that we have in the E-zone code do apply in the transition area, and we are proposing to update those, and so those updated lighting standards would also apply in the transition area. And then there is, in some certain circumstances, there's a reduction in the front setback or street setback that also applies in the transition area. There are some also industrial-specific regulations that apply there. There are landscape buffering requirements, and those landscape buffering requirements really only apply to heavy truck areas, exterior work activities, and material storage activities. So if you're doing those external work activities on an industrial site, those buffering requirements do apply in the transition area, but there's no buffering requirement for buildings, no buffering requirements for other types of structures, such as generators, compressors, or other things that would be accessory to an industrial development. So it's really only when you're doing that exterior work or exterior truck activities that you're going to trigger those landscaping requirements in that transition area. And then some exemptions, and again, this is all talking about existing regulations. These aren't things that we're proposing to change with this project. This is really just existing regulations that already apply that are not being changed. So your existing operations and maintenance of those operations and repair of buildings and structures that are already existing on a site, all of that is fully exempt. So your building, your structure, your paved area, the existing utilities, if you have agricultural uses on the site, if you have landscaping on the site, all of those things are fully exempt, can be maintained within their existing development footprint. Even when E-zones are expanding onto sites that didn't have them previously, all those existing uses are fully exempt and can continue in perpetuity. And those exemptions continue with change of ownership as well, too. So as long as it's an existing use and those uses are continuing, that is fully exempt. Typically, replacement is also exempt. There are some exceptions to that. If you're, such as expansion of the building footprint into the E-zone would abrogate that exemption. And if your building is in a floodplain, then that would not be exempt if you need to do a full replacement. But maintenance, upkeep, whatever use of that building is exempt. It's only that complete replacement that you might come into a situation where that exemption might not apply. And then agricultural uses too, we had some testimony about agricultural uses. Agricultural uses are also fully exempt. So if you have a site that has an existing agricultural use and you want to continue that use, even if it's in the protection zone, fully exempt, no restrictions on that. Those exemptions allow for change of crop type. They allow for the installation of irrigation systems, harvesting of crops. There are even, I don't think in the Columbia Corridor, but some places in the West Hills, where people have existing logging operations on sites in forested areas. Forestry is covered by the agricultural exemption as well too. So it's a pretty broad exemption for existing agricultural uses.
And so again, just to be clear, so exemption means it basically is not subject to the environmental chapter requirements. Basically, so you just don't have to meet any of those requirements of the environmental overlay zone.
And then, so there are these circumstances where building, oh yeah, go ahead.
So could someone have a tree harvest operation in the Northeast Industrial Area?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think there are any logging operations.
It'd have to predate okay, it has to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah, if you can demonstrate that there's a continual use that goes back years and you have been harvesting previously, there are a few operations in the West Hills. It came up with a tax exemption thing it's complicated, but yeah.
Even in RF?
What's that?
Even in RF, they wouldn't be able to do new?
Not new, it'd have to be existing. It'd have to be an existing tree harvesting use. So in those situations where that exemption doesn't apply to building replacement or building expansion, there are still standards that allow that to happen. It really only applies within the resource area of the conservation zone, but if you wanted to expand a building in the conservation zone, you can expand basically unlimited within existing disturbance areas. There's a limit on the total disturbance area of creation of new disturbance area, but if it's an existing disturbance area and you want to expand your building, you can do that. There are some required site enhancements, so you'd have to do some revegetation plantings elsewhere on the site to compensate for those building expansions, but there's nothing that would prohibit you from expanding within an existing disturbance area in the resource area of the conservation zone. There are some circumstances where you couldn't meet standards, such as if setbacks can't be met. So if you can't meet a setback from a river, from a stream, from a wetland, you could trigger environmental review in those situations, which doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you go through that discretionary review process instead of just meeting standards.
And I guess to try to bring what a disturbance area specifically is. So say, for example, you have existing parking lot and you wanted to build a new building where that existing parking lot is, that would be within the existing disturbance area, and you would be able to meet the standards again, as long as you don't exceed the allowed disturbance area totals as a result of that.
could be a landscaped area or a lawn as well too. So it's really anywhere that's not an existing natural area that's just totally unmaintained and is totally vegetated. But if it's a landscaped area, lawn, paved area, graveled area, those are all looked at as being an existing disturbance area.
And I think just as a comment, in terms of the intent of the the application of, and that's something that people ask a lot about, why would you apply an environmental zone across on a developed building or a developed area? And basically what we're really looking to do is that, so we understand that the existing development would stay and would continue to be allowed, as we talked about, and you could do all the things we talked about. But it's really about why we apply them is that then we're not expanding, making the situation more developed, making it worse within those areas in terms of for natural resources. We're really looking at, that's why we regulate the expansion of buildings different than we do within the existing footprint. Again, we want to make sure that to the extent we can, we're reducing that expansion of issues within those areas that we want to protect.
And then we had a number of conversations or a number of pieces of testimony submitted about river-dependent uses. And there's river-dependent, river-related never really doesn't apply to residences, but we recognize that in Columbia Corridor, there are a lot of floating home morages and a lot of people living on the water. And so in terms of river-dependent, river-related uses, there's no specific allowance for that, and there's no specific prohibition against it in the E-zone code. It's just it's a use, and if you can meet standards, then you can do it, and if you can't meet standards, then you go through environmental review. Typically for overwater structures, docks, any kind of thing that's going to be within the banks of a river that's going to be over water, you can't meet standards just because there's a required setback from the Columbia River. You can't meet. So you're going to trigger a discretionary review if you're going to do a new structure or a significant expansion of the structure that's an overwater structure. But again, that doesn't mean it's prohibited. It just means that you are that you're just going to go through a discretionary review process for those types of impacts, and you're going to have to mitigate for those impacts by doing some kind of resource enhancement. And we're not proposing any changes to those regulations in this project at all. These are all existing regulations that apply, and already 100% of the Columbia River is covered by C-zone as it is currently today. Like if you look at the existing E-zones right now, like the whole river is covered. So a number of people that have testified about impacts to morages and docks and industrial uses that have docks and things like that. We're not proposing any changes to those regulations at all through this project. And in a lot of those sites, there's really not a significant change in the E-zone coverage. And we'll get into more detail about some of those site-specific questions the next time we come to you.
But I think also just to make sure, so specifically, I think there were some from, interests of the floating home communities that are on the Columbia. And we do have an exemption, as you can see here, that basically we look at it as long as you are replacing a floating home with an existing slip, it's exempt from environmental overlay zone requirements as well. But if you're talking about a dock or something like that, that is, again, if you're replacing a dock, and again, to emphasize the reasoning for that is, if you are going to be replacing it, we want to try to, again, we go back to in terms of how we approach environmental overlay zones, really that avoid, minimize, mitigate. And so if you are going to replace it, you would want to have you do the alternatives analysis of how that dock might be developed, the new dock what it might look like, and how it might be able to, and if you can imagine something a dock that's been built or put in place in 1980 versus now, it's going to potentially have could have a different design, a different type of sizing and things like that. And so that's why you would go through environmental reviews, to go through that process of showing that you have considered different alternatives, and then the one that has the least impact is chosen. And I think to kind of piggyback on the idea of these river-dependent, river-related uses, I guess I'll also say that in general, really, other than the types of like morages and that sort of thing, river-dependent, river-related is really primarily an emphasis of the North Reach, and that's the environmental zones are not applied there. We have a separate zoning code regime, although clearly there are some types of things that the E-zone applies through river-dependent. So a lot of the testimony that we received related to the morages and other river-dependent or river-related activities, businesses and things like that, a lot of the proposals are specifically about floodplain requirements. So we're going to just wanted to go through that because what they're really, again, nothing is changing on the water. What is it currently would apply. We aren't changing anything in terms of how a river dependent or dock is, the requirements they have to meet. That's basically staying the same to what Daniel said. There are some cases where the floodplain extends, and it's really about that. Just a little bit of background on the floodplain. The BIOP again, result of a litigation against FEMA on the National Flood Insurance Program, released 2016. It's kind of hard to believe, 10 years ago. Release implementation plan 2021. So we have been responding to that to try to make sure that when it is fully implemented and that we can demonstrate that we comply with those new requirements. And so we, as some of you have been around long enough to know, back in 2020, we did the River Plan South Reach, where it was the first step where we started incorporating floodplain requirements. And then in 2023, we adopted the Floodplain Resilience Plan, which was most of the rest of the city. But we did carve out some things for it where we did not apply those requirements to the industrial zones, again, because of the EOA and the considerations that we've been talking about. And also because of that, we held off on expansion of the environmental zones to make sure that all of it was in the floodplain. We just applied some regulations to existing E-zones, but didn't propose expansions because we expected to be part of this process in the Columbia Corridor. We've also done some other, as you are aware, some updates to the building regulations through Title 24 and the stormwater management manual. Those are not under the BPS's purview. So just as a reminder of what is proposed in the CCIL E-zone project is basically making sure that 170 feet, because that 170 feet, which is known as the riparian buffer area, is a specific area that was identified in the biological opinion as needing a higher level of protection and a higher level of mitigation. And so we are making sure that at least, if not for other reasons, there might be in protection, some of the floodplain going to be in a protection zone, but if it's not, if there's not at least a conservation zone for another reason, that we make sure that first 170 feet within the floodplain is within the conservation overlay zone. Largely to get to that second bullet, which is about a requirement, we are adding standards that would essentially allow for a clear and objective approach to meeting that mitigation, the additional mitigation requirements. Basically, per the biological opinion, you're really supposed to be improving that area, so beneficial gain, and the way in which FEMA has gone about that in all of their documents is this dedication of an area that's equal to 5%. You could do more if you wanted, but 5% of any development that's proposed in that riparian buffer area has to be set aside. So if you have 100 square feet of proposed development in the riparian buffer area, 5 square feet need to be planted with trees and vegetation, essentially. And that's the improvement that is associated with, and the recognition of that higher quality habitat within the 170 feet. As I said, in the floodplain resilience plan, we did not apply specifically like the tree removal requirement, the tree replacement requirements to the industrial zones, because again, we assumed as a part of the Columbia Corridor project, we would be looking at all of the industrial zones. And so basically we would be removing that exception for industrial zones as a part of this. We are proposing to remove that exception as a part of the CCIL. Daniel.
Thank you. So originally, when we started the E-zone map correction project, which we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes, we included the Columbia Corridor in that area. So we did some initial outreach in this geography. We met with the East Columbia Neighborhood Association. We met with Hayden Island Neighborhood Association, St. John's, a few others. We sent postcards to all the property owners back in 2018 or 2019 as part of that project. And then we made the decision to exclude the Columbia Corridor and industrial lands from the E-zone project because we wanted to team up with the EOA. But we continued to do additional outreach. So we were doing a citywide wetland inventory project in conjunction with the Bureau of Environmental Services. So everybody in the city of Portland that had a wetland that's in an existing inventory or a provisionally mapped wetland that was in a new inventory that BES was putting together received 2 sets of postcards, one in March and one in December of 2020, offering a free wetland field verification where a wetland scientist, either from BES or from a private contractor working with BES, would come out and field verify wetlands. I know that a number of those field verifications happened in the Columbia Corridor at the request of property owners. We sent postcards in September of 2022 at the kickoff of this project when we first posted our CCIL draft E-zone map online. So we sent postcards to every single person in the property in the project area as of 2022 in September, saying, "Hey, look at this map, look at the natural resources, request a site visit if you want." And then in between 2023 and 2025, we worked with a collaborative working group in conjunction with the EOA that consists of industrial business owners, business associations, and environmental groups all convened 12 different times to talk through the CCIL project and the EOA and how the two interfaced. And then when we released our discussion draft in September of last year, we again sent postcards to everybody in the project area, asking them to look at the documents and review our online map again. We held a number of public meetings to do outreach in conjunction with that discussion draft release. And we also did some interfacing with tribal governments to ask for their engagement with this project.
And I guess another note just on the public meetings, we had the presentation of basically of the PowerPoint on the website. So if someone was unable to attend one of these, some of them hybrid, some of them in person, you could see at least the presentation of what was being proposed for the discussion draft.
And then when we released the proposed draft, as required by state regulations, we sent notices informing all the people in the project. Yeah, go ahead.
Back, you said you contacted 6 tribal governments and the Fish Commission. Did they respond? I'm curious what the nature of that conversation was.
Well, there was, let's see, we received from the
Grand Ronde.
Grand Ronde. They did have a few comments, and we essentially in preparation for so we didn't have the tribal liaison manager in place at the moment, but they the government relations the bureau had been I think starting the process of reaching out and kind of identifying how that program should be structured. And so some of those questions, there was only a few comments that we received from the Grand Ronde, but we thought those probably were a little broader in terms of more of a general process in terms of how the city of Portland engages with the Grand Ronde. And so the expectation is some of those hopefully will be dealt with through that process that they're developing, and now we have a new tribal relations manager who was recently hired that can get to it's more of it was kind of how are we generally engaging with them on particular things of value that they would like to see. And I think that's best handled through the government relations.
I would only add very quickly that, we did reach out several times. The response back was limited, and where there were questions and requests for, information and further engagement, we did respond. And I think, what Jeff said about ultimately some of those were kind of bigger issues that once we have a more established kind of with the new tribal liaison manager, we'll be able to better address those issues.
And I just want to thank everyone who shared testimony with us, wanting to ensure that we had consultation from tribal governments and recognizing that this is far from the only project that has been long awaiting a tribal liaison for the city. So thank you.
Yeah, so, and then we mailed notices of informing all people in the project area, all impacted properties in the project area of the upcoming first evidentiary hearing within the statutory deadline. We published the proposed draft on our website in December. and updated our map app with the proposed draft E-zones at that time. And we've been offering site visits. And going back to the E-zone map correction project, we did a number of site visits in this project geography as well. But then going back to 2022, we've been doing periodically site visits when requests have come in. We've done approximately 90 so far, including those that we did during the E-zone project. There was about 3 dozen for that. And then we've done additional site visits as requests have come in for this project. And then we have on our website, we have a listserv mailing list with more than 800 people signed up for it. And we've been including this project in our monthly project updates since 2022 when we first posted the map app online for public review. So it's been a long process of public engagement that's been ongoing. And so just some context on the E-zone map correction project. There's a couple of members on this committee that were part of the Planning and Sustainability Commission when that project came through. And we remapped environmental overlay zones in a very similar way, used a similar methodology to this project. Because we called it and we framed it as a map correction project, that project was rooted in existing adopted policy largely. So what we were attempting to do was look at what policies were adopted by previous projects, use those, the updated natural resource inventory, and just take that existing adopted policy and apply it to the new resources as they were currently mapped at the time. It was mostly a residential area that was part of the project area. I think the next slide is a map. You can see where it is. So this is mostly residential areas, some open space areas, including Forest Park. There were a few dispersed industrial and commercial areas that were part of the project area, but it was really largely a residential geography. And it was more than twice the size of the project area that's in the Columbia Corridor. And I think we have about 30 resource sites in the Columbia Corridor. There were 138 resource sites in that project area. So lots and lots of different, finely granulated natural resource protection decisions that were intended to follow the existing adopted policy. And so we have kind of a range of different buffers that were applied through those different resource site natural resource protection decisions. So one common one was to apply a 25-foot P-zone buffer to streams and wetlands, and then apply C-zone between 25 and 50 feet. On resource sites that had pre-existing P-zones applied, which many did, we would apply a 50-foot P-zone buffer, which is consistent with what we're proposing as our baseline in the CCIL project. And then there are a number of resource sites that were kind of heavily forested residential areas in the West Hills where we applied 100-foot P-zone buffers to streams and wetlands, which is far beyond what we're proposing in this project. So there's kind of a range of different things that was done in that project, but there was that kind of minimum of at least 25 feet of P-zone and 25 feet of C-zone. And I think we bring these up to kind of frame the context of our baseline proposals and the modified proposals that we have for the resource sites in this project, to show that they're kind of consistent with this previous project, but also to kind of give you some context of if you want to kind of dig into these resource protections decisions that we're proposing, and get into whether they're appropriate or whether you want to look at some policy adjustments or things like that, like to kind of show you the range of different things that we could potentially do with these if it was deemed appropriate to make some modifications to that.
And that's actually our last slide, but we'll say, and we had gone over it in a previous, at the hearing, I guess, but that breakdown of the different approaches and the different resource sites that we provided is really, we have tried to do our best to make sure that what we're proposing responds to the condition on the ground, and again maintains our, in some cases, our existing policy or existing agreements with the Port of Portland, for example, and that sort of thing, while still ensuring that there's appropriate environmental protections moving forward. And with that, we're done in terms of presentation. So we're just looking if any questions or discussion.
Yeah, Director Diefendorfer.
Oh, thank you. I think that Jeff, in his final comments, did cover this, but I just wanted to emphasize that last slide was really to also, I think, demonstrate how the different methodologies were responsive to context, right? And so we've similarly tried to apply that here. So I just wanted to emphasize that the purpose of showing that slide was to show kind of the range that has been used before, and to show that it's been contextual to what kind of geography and what kinds of uses are being affected in a given process. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson?
Thanks for the presentation, Jeff and Daniel. I was wondering if the staff is planning to bring forward any amendments that have resulted from mapping corrections that came about from some of the site visits that have happened.
Yeah, and because we think the plan is that for the next work session, we will, unfortunately for all of you, we will go through, the expectation is we will go through every site and the individual testimony that we receive and basically just say, this is the map of it, this is the proposal, this is what we think. I mean, we have made changes based on our site visits, of course, in terms of making sure that certain resources are there. But basically, the expectation is that just given the sheer number of it and being able to fully vet everything, this was sort of a general introduction and a general providing of context for all of you in terms of any requests you have for us. The next one will really get into where the rubber meets the road, and you'll see particular sites where proposals are could cause portions of a site to be covered by P-zone, for example, and things like that. But also to document what we have come to from our site visits and what we think is what our recommendation on particular sites would be, and whether it has an implication for our larger proposals, for something to consider. But basically, we wanted to make sure we take enough time to do all that, and then we will come with that in addition to any other suggestions, topics, whatever you all would like to talk about in our next work session as well. But that's where it really gets into the nitty-gritty of what exactly is being proposed on individual sites.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to that.
And I guess I would also say, if any of you, as you go through testimony and you look at a particular site and you would like, we're happy to discuss specifics with you as you start to noodle through, the implications of all this.
Commissioner O'Meara.
Thank you for the presentation, Commissioner O'Meara, for the record. I think I'm clear now on the replacement. I had a question about, we heard a lot of testimony about could structures be replaced. I think I'm clear on that. Generally, there are exemptions for replacement as long as they stay within the same footprint and meet, the parameters. There was a lot of testimony, however, to new structures, so ADUs in backyards, sheds, other new structures. And then I also have a question on additions to existing structures. And this might be more in the weeds for our next work session, so feel free to table that. But I continue just to have questions about examples, since we did hear so much testimony around this really limiting, or the concern of limitations around new development, specifically for single-family residential homeowners. And we all know, needs change in a home as families grow, et cetera. So whether it's next session or now, if you have some thoughts, but that's continue to have curiosity around that.
Yeah, I would say generally, it depends on if we're talking about the protection zone or the conservation zone. You can expand in the conservation zone. Again, a lot of these, especially with newly applied protection zone, really that's why we highlighted the transition area. That's if the proposal is in the transition area, it would apply even if it was, a newly applied P-zone. It still applies to transition area. That first 25 feet is always an area that, again, has less, requirements to it. One of the changes that, in terms of like an ADU, for example, we have, one of the things that we actually, a small proposed amendment is that we, right now, ADUs aren't allowed to have a zero setback from lot lines and things like that, because we do have allowances for primary structures and that sort of thing to be moving to where you can place it maybe have a reduced setback so that you can stay out of the E zone. ADUs will be added to that as a part of a proposal. But if, I mean, basically, to be honest with you, for like an ADU, if there's adequate space elsewhere on a site, the expectation is you would put the ADU outside of the E zone, or you would in the if you are unable to keep it out of the of an overlay zone, primarily the conservation in terms of our maximum disturbance area is that you could meet the standards as long as you stay within the total allowed disturbance area for the site and the zone.
Even if you exceed the disturbance area in the conservation zone, if you can meet setbacks, you can do it in the conservation zone. The setbacks could be problematic for a lot of these sites. So the ones that are constrained by expanding E-zones, it's because this is a site where they built it right next to the slough, in a lot of cases in the Columbia corridor, and so there's not a lot of area on that site that can meet those setbacks. But there are a number of situations where there are expanding E-zones where there is space for an ADU, but it is site-specific. And it's a matter of, could it go through exemptions? In some cases, it probably could. If it's in the transition area, could it go through standards? It probably could in the conservation zone, and it might also trigger environmental review in some situations.
Probably is it's obvious, but also if you are able to just stay out of the E zone, nothing applies. So if on a site you place your ADU not in an E zone and you have enough space and you put it where there's no E zone, then none of this applies. But it's only if you feel it necessary, if you have other space, if you feel it necessary to propose development in the E zone, then things would be triggered.
Questions? I think we're all awaiting the next
8
time when
o'clock.
we go into granular detail. And oh, yeah, thank you.
It's just curiosity. How many sites would you estimate, individual sites that we'll be looking at next time?
I mean, I think we had at least 40 kind of more site-specific requests, I would think. Yeah, does that sound right?
Somewhere in that.
I think more than half of the total, I think we were around 80 people who provided testimony. I think more than half are people asking for something specific and raising concern about their site specifically, not saying, oh, I think we should apply a 30-foot protection zone or a 100-foot protection zone. It's really more my concerns on their individual properties.
And we will definitely address all of those in our written materials. I don't know if you plan on going through each individual site one by one in the presentation, or if we'll even have time for that, but certainly we will provide responses to each of those, and if there's not enough time to go through each of them individually, if commissioners have a specific site that you want to discuss that's not part of our itinerary, we can add it to make sure that we address that.
Commissioners, I would just add very quickly that I imagine that there could be some bundling of them for purposes of going through them. You'll have the memo that you'll be able to see what we're recommending on each individual site, but for purposes of the presentation, going through it in commission in the meeting, I think we'll try to bundle them by themes like issues and talk about how we're resolving them. Does that sound good? Right? Yeah. Thanks.
Exactly.
So hydrate.
It's nothing compared to the zone map correction project. There
And
was
that,
a lot of,
like the
it was
Herculean, I just
months
want
and
to
months,
underscore the
hopefully.
Herculean effort by staff in E-zone correction project, both previous and this one. And it sounds also like I hope that some of your communications with folks that we heard who were like, why does this have an E-zone or a P-zone? It's literally a parking lot. Do I have to dig this up now? Are assuaged in that, no, they do not. Okay, well, before we, I want to acknowledge that in our previous conversation around industrial lands and trade jobs that we did not acknowledge, I think the only commissioner here who actively does workforce development of trade jobs, which is Commissioner Alvarado of the Community Cycling Center, and would that the economy allowed bicyclists to actually be paid what they are worth. So this job, thank you so much, Jeff and Daniel and all staff who have been working on this. This too, in addition to the economic opportunity analysis, will be continued to our April 14th meeting at 12:30. Again, we are not meeting on March 24th. Also want to deeply appreciate, we were doing this before the meeting, that we can only endeavor to deserve our commission clerk, Autumn Buckridge, who helped us navigate with Open Signal today. A lot goes on beneath the hood that anyone can get. Join along at home, join virtually like our commissioners Thompson and Alvarado have this evening. So just deep appreciation for both Autumn and Open Signal. And we are not going to meet on March 24th, so do not get at us.
Actually,
And with
can
that,
can I interrupt?
Please
Chair
do.
Ralph? I just wanted to say one thing. I think it kind of to connect to the EOA, if there are, to what I think Patricia was saying, if there are certain changes that you think we can make and we could give you a sense of what it would mean for the application of the E-zone as just a starting, understanding if there's certain things, like, again, if you wanted to look at a particular area or a particular protection overlay zone and how, I mean, if it's outside, we already know those numbers and we can provide the numbers for the low and medium and the high scenario that we've already looked at, if you wanted to have that as a baseline. But anyhow, just let us know, and maybe in terms of how you're thinking about and what the implications of the changes, because I think to Commissioner Knowles, your question, we're trying to do these together so that we understand when we change something with the E-zone, what does it mean for the EOA, and we can try our, in the next, what I guess it is now, 6 weeks, so we could provide that information to the extent possible.
thank you. Anything else now that I have soft-shoed enough? People, okay. Thank you all, and with that, we are adjourned. Where will you be? They say it's some. That's pretty good.